Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nihiyeh bidvaroi.
Amen.
Oh, sorry about that. B'chachma pesach sharm. All right, b'siyata d'shmaya, let's jump into today's teaching in Sefer Kedushas Levi, with Hashem's help. L'chaim. And we take a look at the pasuk v'ishtachavise me'rachayk, where Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai are said to have bowed down from afar. Matan Torah was the energy of Gevura. Matan Torah was a very heavy energy. There was a lot of Yira, which we're going to learn about now. And Matan Torah, the Koilos, Subrakim, and the Eish, and the Har Chared, and Klal Yisrael died, and they all came back to life, and they couldn't handle it. It was very, very, extremely intense, which is quite interesting, just thinking about it. When Hashem reveals himself to Eliyahu Hanavi and says, Loi barash Hashem, right? Hashem is not in the sound, Hashem is not in the fire. Kol d'ma badaka, I can't think of, many things that are as contrasting to a Kol d'ma badaka than Matan Torah was not a Kol d'ma badaka. It was a tremendous explosion of spiritual energy. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But be that as it may, the pasuk in this week's parsha describes Klal Yisrael as v'hishtachavissem me'rachayk. They all fell over me'rachayk, from a distance. This is one of the most fundamental paragraphs that really I've seen in the Sfarim HaKadoshim from the standpoint of really cutting to the core of what our Emunah as Yidden who are connected to the Torah of Pnimius is, really. To see such a compact piece of text that really contains within it the foundation that we need in order to understand what is it that taking sort of the, popping the hood off of Emunah, the Emunah of Klal Yisrael, you find, what do you find underneath, right? What underlies, in a more complex, nuanced sense, what it is that we believe as Yidden, who are connected to that world of Pnimius, Ha'avodah, Pnimius of Yiddishkeit. So let's learn this together. He says like this, Yesh Laimar, he wants to say the following comment. Tihini Abayir Baruch Hu, Etzlo Yesh Kiviyachol Shnei Bechinos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has two different aspects. Rachayk, V'karev. There's the aspect of Hashem's existential distance, which we're going to speak about. And there's also an aspect in which Hashem is super close. We would call this transcendence and immanence. On the one side, there's nothing more distant than God, right? From our human brains, nobody knows what God is. We can describe him according to the Rambam. The only way to describe him is by saying what he isn't, but he's completely beyond. And at the same time, godliness, which we're going to learn from the Baal HaTanya in an incredible, incredible teaching in Perek Chaf Aleph, Hashem is super close. In the words of the Ibn Ezra, Karev mikol karev. Hashem is closer than the closest relative. Hashem is mamish close to us in the most essential way. Right. So the Berditchover explains this, right? Exactly. Ki karev elecha davar ma'id. So let's see how the Berditchover spells this out. Bechinas rachayk, the aspect in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is quote unquote distant, hu sha'anu ma'aminim, means that we believe sha'orein soif Baruch Hu kadmoin l'chalak hadmoinim ve'ein shem beria ba'olam yachal hasigai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is what's called kadmoin l'chalak hadmoinim. Hashem is fundamentally the only true reality in existence. He is existence, right? Scratched down to the most fundamental level of reality. And it's just it, right? Him, her, godliness. Hard to find a word to describe it because any word that you use is already limiting because you can't really capture it in a word. You can just say being, pure being, right? What is that? Existence is the best words that we could come up with. And that is quite accurate because from the standpoint of Pnimius HaTorah, the Shem Yud Ke Vav Ke, which we can't pronounce as it is written, so we say Shem Havaya, that's what that word means. Havaya just means existence. That's what Hashem is. He doesn't exist, he is existence. Kadmoin l'chalak hadmoinim. So our minds are not really able to grasp that. Even the aspect, and this is a nuanced thought that's brought out in Sefer Ginas Egais from Rabbi Yosef Kektilia, He writes that if you think of it, even God, quote unquote, the Creator, is already not the essence of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, because that's called Elikim. And it's fascinating because everybody knows, right, that when the Chachamim were gathered together and told to write Sifrei Torah, they had this huge siyata d'shmaya where they all switched around the first pasuk so that it shouldn't say Bereshis bara Elikim, right, which would sound like the beginning created God, right? So they flipped it around and said Elikim bara Bereshis. No, God created the beginning. But says the Ginas Egais, if you think of it, and it's very radical, but he writes this in Rishon. He says the pasuk as it's written is more accurate. Yes, Bereshis, in the beginning, the first thing that Ein Sof created was Elokim. This is what he writes, black on white. He says, but Pnimius, it is accurate. You just have to know how to understand that, right? Chas v'shalom, not shtei reshuyos, but that Elokim is a pu'ula, is an action, the creative impulse of what's called Rashis, which is a reference to Yud Kei Vav Kei. Says the Ginas Egos, that's why throughout the creation narrative, every time a new creation is brought to bear, is brought into being, we always, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, Vayomer Elikim Yehi Ar, Yehi Rikia, Yehi. Says the Ginas Egos, that inyan of Yud Hey Yud is drawing from the energy of Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's like saying Elikim, the creator energy, is drawing fundamental existence from Yud Kei Vav Kei. Vayomer Elikim Yehi Ar. That pure being that's rooted in this concept of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Havaya, which is Kadman L'Chala Kadmonim, should become this thing called light. But we have to realize Elikim, that's not where it's at. Bereshis bara Elikim. There's something that even transcends, which is just pure being. What's called in Kabbalah the Yehuda Ilah, that aspect of the singularity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's being, which is something that's impossible for our minds really to grasp. Nobody can grasp this aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the Kadmon. Why? The brain can't grasp it. Because the brain is already something that was created, right? It was something new. It's something novel. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kadmon Lakal. But Hashem b'chvoido u'va'atzmai Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Shem Havaya, is Kadmon to anything that was created. So that means that our brain is already on a strata of reality that's distant and divorced from the essence of things, which is why, of course, it can't grasp that which is kadam, right? That which is prior to it, because it's trapped in its experience as a creation. And it's not able to grasp, it's outside of its realm of experience. It cannot grasp the reality of the Yud Kei Vav Kei from which it emerged. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kadman L'Kol, Ve'ein Shem Oifan V'Sarav. There's not even any of the Oifanim and the Srafim Asher Yasagosai that are really able to grasp Hashem. Ki Hu L'Malam and Asaga, because Hashem is completely beyond anything. V'Zeo B'chinas Rachik, and that's the aspect in which Hashem is so distant from us. Hashem is a fundamental mystery. The gap between our understanding / experience and what Hashem is B'chvoid V'Atzmai is, infinitely distant. And Hashem is just completely transcendent, that's the word that we'll use, from our minds. So this is the way, I think, naturally we perceive the relationship that we have with Hashem, right? In the standard educational system, this is how Hashem is taught. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is some being, right, that we have no asaga of, completely distant. We're here, and we do our best to try to contact and connect to Hashem through our avodah, right? That's the more standard understanding. Comes along Chasidus, comes along Pnimis HaTorah Kabbalah, the Ari, the Baal Shem Tov, rooted in the Zohar Kadosh, and they tell us Hashem is not only transcendent, at the very same time that Hashem is infinitely transcendent, Hashem is also infinitely immanent. There is an aspect in which Hashem is super duper close to us. The whole inyan of the Baal Shem Tov is founded on this teaching. Hashem is Karev. Karev Hashem l'nishbrei lev. Karev Hashem l'chol karev. Hashem is close. Infinitely close. and infinitely far. This is called the fancy English word, which really captures Emunah Yisrael, is the word panentheism. Right? This as opposed to pantheism, which is the idea that the world itself is God, right? That just nature is eternal. This is all there is, and it is divine, right? So chas v'shalom to say that Hashem is rachaik, but at the same time we believe that the Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yud Kei Vav Kei that's infinitely beyond is also present within. Transcendent, yes, but also imminent. Hashem is close. Says the Berditchover Rav, Hu sha'anu ma'aminim, and this aspect is our faith. Sha'abayre baruch hu memala kol almin, famous words from the Zohar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills all worlds. Uvigoy kol almin, and is with beyond all worlds. But umakiv kol almin surrounds all worlds to such a degree that les asar panimine, that there is nothing vacant of His presence. Ki, using a pasuk, Meloi chol haaretz kevoidai. Hashem's presence fills and saturates all of reality from the standpoint of the fact that yes, there's a Shem Elikim, but Elikim emerges from Yud Kei Vav Kei. And the way that the Ginas Egos explains this, once I'm mentioning the Ginas Egos, even though there's so many incredible Ramazim, it's a remarkable sefer, so I could have a chavrusa in it every Matzah Shabbos, says that Tzaddik, if you think about the Shem Elikim, which is, we describe the creator energy, what's the gematria of Elikim?
86.
86. Excellent, right? And people say, it can't be 86 because there's a kuf inside. There's not a kuf inside. We just say Elokim, but it is Elohim, right? So many times I teach this to people, like, how can it be? It doesn't. Okay, right? It's 86. Take out the kuf, put back in the hay. 86. What's the gematria of Yud Kei Vav Kei? 26. How do you say numerically, not the words for it, how do you say numerically 26 in Lashon HaKodesh? What are the letters you'd use? Huh? Chaf Vav. Says the Ginas Egos, Yafeh. If you want to reference Yud Kei Vav Kei from the standpoint of Gematria, and you say Chaf Vav, you've already said Pei Vav. Because Chaf, Pei, Vav. Vav. Within Yud Kei Vav Kei already emerges Shem Elokim, 86. Chaf Vav. Already Elokim is in Yud Kei Vav Kei already. Right? Amazing thing. From that standpoint, Elokim itself is a revelation of the infinite God. Sure, again, Yud Kei Vav Kei, absolutely transcendent, Kadman L'Chala Kadmoinim, Ani Rishon. But also, as reality emerges out of that fundamentally hidden mystery of Hashem's experience, what's called Yichuda Ilah, and emerges into our experience of reality, all of those stages in between are weiter revelations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's own being, because again, Tamid Kacha, it always remains the truth that there is only one true reality. Although as you move further down the system, and there are layer upon layer, so to speak, of bridge, which we'll speak about maybe a little bit later, between spirituality and physicality, that reality is hidden. Until here we are, experiencing ourselves as what we experience ourselves as, which is human beings, right? Entities with our own free will and our own volition, and we live in a world of multiplicity and fragmentation and so on. But it still remains true that Malay Chal Haaretz Kavoide, Elikim is already Yud Kei Vav Kei, and that's what we mean when we say V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz b'yom hahu yeh Hashem echad, and we will come to realize that Ushmai, which is always a reference to Shem Elikim, is also echad. Right? That's the great revelation that we try to make reference to when we say 3 times a day, 4 times a day, Shema Yisrael, Hashem is Elokeinu, Hashem echad. It's what Klal Yisrael said with the Nevi'ei Abal when Eliyahu Hanavi did this incredible miracle, and there was a birur, right? This clarification process where HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted his carbon. What did everybody shout and announce? The same thing we say on Yom Kippur at the end of Ne'ilah, Hashem Hu HaElokim. This realization that this experience of Elokim that would appear to be completely divorced and devoid from the essence of Elokos, Hashem hu Elokim. Elokim is weiter, an expression of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hashem is transcendent, but Hashem is immanent. This is actually something that we spoke about. I think the last time we met last week, I wasn't feeling well. 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we spoke about Shemana Esrei, I think, and we spoke about the way that a person journeys from step to step up the ladder of davening, from Birchas HaShachar to Psukei de Zimra to Birchas Kriyas Shema, right? And then Shemana Esrei, finally we arrived. That was Amida, right? And Hineni Anochi Oimed ala Sela ala Tzur, we learned over there. So yeah, there's a bridge, but even on the Bechina of Ani Achrein, at the very, very, very lowest level, it still remains the truth that Ein Oid Milvadai. Not simply, again, that there's not two gods, but Ein Oid Milvadai. There is quite literally nothing other than a godliness right here, right now. We're going to learn this much more from the Baal HaTanya, which we'll get to, Be'ezras Hashem.
So in a practical way for us, this Chavav that you mentioned of the Chav, and then the second letter is basically spelling out the gematria of Elokim.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what we see is, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to us, right? So he's communicating to us. But the first thing that we see is the last thing that he's communicated. So we see the Teva, we see the Elokim, we see, but behind that,
beautiful,
as it were, is the Havaya, which
that's right. Looking beyond the surface of the Sofitevis, right? You're able to penetrate beyond the veil, beautiful, and to find the Chavav. You can't even say Chavav.
Yeah.
You know the right? Yeah. Did I do it? Yeah. Amazing. Says the Berditchover in perhaps again one of the most important lines that we'll ever read in the Sfarim HaKadoshim. Because again, I'll just make a slight cultural reference to what's going on now with the big Thank You Hashem, Rash. I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago in the song that was put out about, the Yidden and Shulchan Aruch and all this stuff. Anyway, better you should know from such things. But there's a whole debate going on, and it all goes back to this. We speak so often about the principle of balance, of both, right? Synthesis. In the Likutei Moharan Shiurim, not a day goes by, Kamat, where we don't speak about Chachma and Bina and Chachma. We need both. We need an experience of self, then we need to lift that self into communication, panim b'panim, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Bina in dialogue, so to speak, with Chachma, to channel down the energy of Keser as it reveals itself in Das, Tiferes, Amudah, and Seisa further down. This is Klal Yisrael's whole energy. This is what we are. Yaakov Avinu, bridging the gap between Avram and Yitzchak, v'chule, v'chule. Right? That's what we speak about all the time. So, of course, the nation of synthesis is going to have to believe in both Rachik and Karev. It is true that there's an aspect of Rachik. It is true that there's an energy, I would call Har Sinai energy, associated with Torah, associated with conditionality. Like the Pasuk in Tehillim says, not everybody is worthy of being able to access Torah. Torah has restrictions, Torah has guidelines. There's the aspect of Din that's manifested in the Bechina of Har Sinai, which we're going to talk about. And it is also true at the same time that there's an aspect of Karev. There's an aspect of immanence, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you and by you and next to you no matter what. That's the energy we speak about often, manifest in Har Habayis, which is the energy of Tefillah, which is the energy of Kibesi, based Tefillah Yikar L'Chala Amim, like I quoted earlier, Karav Hashem L'Chal Kairav. In that place, Hashem is close to anybody who calls out to Him. There's no conditions. That's the place, Daiko, where people who are unworthy come to be able to get recalibrated and bring karbanas, and they're brought closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a result. And b'makim shabal tshuva aimdim tzadikim gemurim enim echadam lamed, and it turns out that tshuva was kadmal olam to power the process from the outset. That's the energy of Har Habayis in contrast with the energy of Har Sinai. Our issue, and you could sort of identify this principle in most arguments hashkafically, most of the time, is that we are either too much to one side and too much to the other side. And people who have a certain netiya are either drawn toward the energy of, which we're going to learn in a minute, Yira Shemayim, and just the Shur Sadin v'chulei, And that's the aspect of rachik. And then the chevra on the other side, right, is just because they're more drawn to the aspect of karev. But the karev people need the rachik people. And guess what? The rachik people need the karev people. Because the beauty is going to be in the synthesis. And that's this line. Says the Berditchover, Va'anu b'nei Yisrael, what it means to be a real Yid. Right? They called that song Real Yidden. Right? To be a real Yid, tzrichan lahamin b'shnei bechinas hanal. You need, here's my favorite word.
Compromise?
Both. Not compromise. No, it's not a compromise. Absolutely not a compromise. It's a synthesis. Not a compromise. Compromise is b'diavad. No, it has to be lichatchila both. We need to believe and hold on to both transcendence and immanence. Immanence and transcendence. Rachik and karev. Karev and also rachik. Ha'echad hu rachik, v'hasheni hu karev. There's the aspect in which Hashem is distant, and there is the aspect in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is close. So what's our response to these two different aspects of godliness? What does it do for me emotionally? What does it do relationally from the standpoint of the dynamic of my connection to that which is both distant and that which is close? Says the Berditchover Rav, Shalom l'rachav u'l'karav Amar Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says peace. On a literal level, it means to those who are distant and to those who are close. But the Berditchover learns this to mean la'oisait tzaddik sheyamin she'Hashem yisbarach hu rachik v'karav la'zeh Hashem yisbarach baruch hu mamshicho min hashpa'is la'olam. Peace. Not to those who are both distant and to those who are close. It means peace to the Yid, the real Yid, who understands the secret of l'rachik u'la'karev. That we need to connect to our HaKadosh Baruch Hu both on the level of rachik, Har Sinai, as transcendence, as well as on the level of karev. That's who gets a blessing from Hashem. Shalom. All the hashpais are going to come down to the world as a result of us getting the sweet spot of balance. That's where we're going to be able to get the experience of shleimus, of shalom. And then our lives will be full of hashpa'ah. So Bihine, says the Berditchover, yesh bechinas ahava v'yira. What it does for us emotionally is that there are two ways of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are two of the 6 constant mitzvahs, Avas Hashem and Yira Shamayim. Says the Berditchover, which is which? What does it mean to be afraid of something? Something is beyond me. Something is stronger than me, right? Something is inscrutable to me, unfathomable to me. Something is more powerful than me. That causes yira, right? Nisyari, from something that's greater. From the aspect of Har Sinai, which is the bechina of Yom Hadin, right? Which is the aspect of the expectations, the conditional layer of the dynamic of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is absolutely, without a question, place for Yiras Shamayim. Okay, now we can talk about what kind of Yira. Yiras ha'oinish, very, very, very low level, right? Something that's called Yira chitzainis. It's by Kadmainim, Yiras ha'oinish was belittled. It was something that's not supposed to.
Tatar? Was that? No.
That's not even Yira Tatar. That's something, according to the Ramak, in terms of Devira, it's something, we shouldn't have at all. Rabbi Nachman was a little bit more accommodating to that kind of Yira because it's the year of the Pshutei Am and it's also beautiful and it has a place. But Yiras ha'oinish means I'm just afraid of getting punished. Right? The only reason that I'm like doing the mitzvahs or staying away from Averis is because I'm afraid of punishment, which, like Rabbi Nachman rightly points out, that's still a Yira. Meaning it still connotes Emunah, and so we shouldn't be so quick to denigrate it. But in the other Sfarim, that's not where we want to be at all. The higher Madrega of the 3 general Madregas of Yiras Shamayim is called Yiras, not ha'oinish, but Yiras. Oh, we're going to get to Remumus. That's the 3rd. Yiras Chet. Yiras Chet is deeper. Yiras Chet means it's not pshat that I'm staying away from the Avera because I'm afraid of the consequence. Yiras Chet means I'm not afraid of the punishment, I'm afraid of the Avera because of what it will do for my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch.
So we're not afraid of Hashem. We're afraid of the act that will take us further away from Hashem.
Yeah, in other words, I'm not afraid of Hashem, I'm afraid of losing Hashem. Not afraid of Him, I'm afraid that I will no longer have Him. That's Yiras Chet. Okay? That's level 2. The 3rd level, or Rabbi is pointing out, I mentioned is Yiras Haroimamus. Yiras Haroimamus is something else. Yiras Haroimamus means I'm so overwhelmed by my consciousness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I can't even imagine acting outside of the Ratzon Ha'elyon because of my hyper consciousness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, right? I'm nullified. There's total bittul. I don't have my own desires, right? Vis-a-vis, in contrast, against what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. It's the Bechina of Ritzaneinu, Lassus Ritzanecha, where a person becomes so refined that literally their will mirrors HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will. That's called Yiras Haroimamus. That's something else. All right, at that point, I wouldn't even use the word fear. I would use the word maybe awe, right? Just an overwhelming sense of presence. That's Yiras Haroimamus. These are the three general levels in the Sfarim: Yiras Oynesh, Yiras Chet, and Yiras Haroimamus. Be that as it may, all of these three respond to the aspect in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Rachik. It's the Rachik of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I have Yira, the overwhelming nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even though Yiras Chet does speak to the relationship, it's still Yira, right? There's still this understanding, there's something not in my control. This can get taken away. Right? This is something beyond me that can be gifted to me, namely the relationship on that level. But it's not mine. It's not in my shlita. I am a subject of it, right? It is not a subject of my own awareness. That's called Yira. And that's Har Sinai energy, because that's what Yira Shemayim is. It's the realization that I can lose this relationship, which is true. That's the point. None of the Sfarim HaKadoshim that speak about Ava and Kirva do away with the fact that there is a strata of the relationship that you either have or you don't have, and it depends on our actions unequivocally. There's no question about that. The Baal Shem Tov would not disagree with that statement. People, and again, so why do people make that mistake? Because the Baal Shem Tov in his Sfarim is speaking about Karev, but it doesn't mean that you don't need Rachik. And in the Svarim that are speaking about Rachik, which is the Musar Svarim and the Halacha Svarim, doesn't mean that they didn't believe in Karev. You understand? We just need to bring these two things together. We need both. But from the standpoint of Rachik, well, that's Har Sinai energy. Har Sinai was din. Im tekablu satara mutav, Hashem says. If you'll receive the Torah, great. Ve'im lav, and if not, sham tekfuraschem. That's called a condition. If you receive the Torah, and if not, it's conditional. Hashem went to the different nations of the world. Do you want to receive the Torah? Maksiv Bey, right? Are you ready to keep the Torah? You'll get it. Are you not? You won't. That's the energy of Har Sinai. Har Habayis, you have no such distinctions. Ki Beisi Beis Tefillah, again, the Beis Hamikdash is the Chol Ha'amim, Shlomo HaMelech. Of all the things he could have chose to say at the dedication of the temple, of the first Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo HaMelech built, he spends a huge portion of his declarative, inauguration, speaking about the non-Jews, that this should be a place where all the Umas Ha'olam are able to come, and Hashem will listen to their tefillahs. Har Habayis is universal. Har Habayis is everyone's mountain. Har Sinai is something else. Har Shemimenu Yarda Sin Allah Olam, the Gemara tells us. It was called Sinai. Take out the sin, replaced it with a samach. Sinna. It's an energy of din. That's Har Sinai. Memela, says the Berditchover, yeah, v'zeh shekasav, that's why the pasuk telling us what our response is supposed to be to the aspect in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fundamentally transcendent, says v'hishtachavissem meirachik. What is the act of hishtachavaya? What does the act of bowing down connote? Du b'chinas yira. They fell over out of fear, out of submission. Shemishtachaveh lazeh amar meirachik. Their bowing down, which was an expression of Yiras Shamayim, was responding to what aspect of the dynamic of the relationship with Hashem that they were experiencing, says the pasuk, v'ishtachavisem Yiras Shamayim meirachik. Because Har Sinai was a gilui of this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is rachik. And that's the whole inyan with the fences, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Moshe Rabbeinu down twice. War in the Bnei Yisrael. They have to stand behind the fence. You understand? All of these different psukim come to communicate a general energy that's associated with Har Sinai. You are here, Hashem is there. That's true. Vayerid Hashem al Har Sinai connotes approaching. Asa meriva v'os kodesh, right? Hashem comes forth. But what he brings forth is the magnitude of his transcendence. It isn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu being mitzamtzeh. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicating with such revelation that Klal Yisrael say, we can't handle it anymore. We need to hear it through Moshe Rabbeinu. Anoichi, says Hashem, Ana nafshi ksavis yavis. I'm giving over to you the totality of me. And that's, to use a very precise word, awesome. That's awesome. It's awesome. In that moment is a giloy, a revelation. The Shivarakim opened up. Klal Yisrael are able to perceive straight through to the ultimate reality that this entity, again, can't even use the word entity because that already puts boundaries against it. This, you can't even say this, right? Because even this is subjectifying. There's no word to use. It's just breath. Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's just breathing, right? What should we say? Being, right? Existence is infinitely beyond us. That's rachik.
Is that what they couldn't take?
It would, yeah.
Maybe if there would have been mitzad not gvura, maybe there would have been more palpable.
What do you mean?
Mitzad Klal Yisrael tell Moshe Rabbeinu, we can't hear it anymore. We can't take this richuk. It's not how we saw our relationship with Hashem.
I don't know. Could be. That's already parshanut. I don't know. It's possible. But on a simple level, it means they were overwhelmed by the realization of this fact. And they responded with an expression of yira, which is called v'hishtachavoya. V'hishtchavisem meirachik. That's yira shemayim. Okay, now we'll finish this, and then we'll learn a little bit from the Berditchover, from the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, the Baal HaTanya. Oyeh Shloimar, he gives another interesting, important, actually, obviously it's important interpretation of this pasuk. Dihine Arizal Kasav v'Kavanas Aleinu. It's written in Ari HaKadosh for the Kavanas, the Kabbalistic intentions of Aleinu l'Shabeach. V'Anachnu Kairim. At that point where we're supposed to bow down, that when we bow down during Shemana Esrei, what we're doing is physically, because we know that the whole world is really wrapped up into the human form that's created by Tselem Elokim, right? Nasa Adam, like the Svar Makdashim tell us, all the different forces of the Bria are packed into the human being. So what we do down here has an impact on all of the Olam HaSalyanim. It's like a reverse puppet, where we're below, but we're pulling the strings. Yaakov Cheval Nachalasai, right? We're the ones that are pulling on the rope, right, from down here, and that's causing ripple effects all the way through the Seder Shtalshalos Lamala. That when we bow down physically during davening, the very experience of bowing means that I'm taking that which is above, which is, of course, the higher levels of hashpa, the more revealed layers of reality, and I'm drawing it down below. When we bow down in davening, we should be mechaved. We're drawing down shefa from the higher realms of reality down into the more limited, constricted realms of reality. And that's what Klal Yisrael were doing at this point when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing the Torah down into the world. As Hainu shetamshichu shefa rav. Klal Yisrael were being instructed v'hishtchavisem, bow down, because then you'll be able to access the shefa that exists mibechinas urachik, from that which is otherwise distant. The way to open the tap and draw shefa down is v'hishtchavisem. When we bow down during davening, we should have kavana that in our physical form we're being mamshich shefa. From where? Meirachik. From that bechina, that's called a rachik, where there's endless shefa, and that's the shirish of everything on his el v'daik, and a person should think about this teaching, both of these teachings, very, very, very carefully. So I just want, for the last few minutes, let's try to learn this a little bit more quickly. This comes from the Baal HaTanya in Perek Chaf Aleph. And over here, although the Berditchover in the piece that we just learned focuses more on the Yira aspect, which is Rachik, I wanted to learn a piece from the Baal HaTanya which speaks about the aspect of Karev to help us contextualize that as well, just to balance it out, right? Because we spent a lot of time speaking about Yira. Now let's speak about Ahava and how we can attain Ahava from contemplating and meditating on this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is endlessly distant, but also at the same time endlessly near. Says the Baal HaTanya, a person needs to understand that Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu shaloi k'midas basar v'dam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not like human beings, obviously in millions of ways, but over here he says specifically, what does he mean? Sha'adam kishemedaber dibur, when a person says a word, hare hevel hadibur shebepiv hu murgosh, v'nira daber b'fnei atzmei muvdol misharshai. The word emerges from their mouth, the breath that's powering that word leaves the mouth, and it's gone. It is separate from the person that spoke the word. The word is spoken, sound waves shoot off into the ether, right, into the air, however this stuff works. I don't claim to know, right, but I imagine there are sound waves, right, obviously that are produced when a person speaks, and they are cut off from the person who spoke them. They get cut off from the 10 aspects of the nefesh that allowed the person to express whatever thought they intended to express. Avala Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to help us conceptualize this a little bit. Avala Kadosh Baruch Hu, but when it relates to Hashem and His speech with which He created the world, Ein diburai muvdal mimenu yizbarach chas shalom. Hashem's dibur never gets disconnected, so to speak, when the words are spoken. Because again, it's metaphoric. Hashem is obviously, we established, not a being who can speak, because speaking connotes that I am articulating something outside of me, but there is nothing outside of Hashem, right? So obviously, the whole concept of speaking, which would connote there's something in here that means to be communicated out there into the air that isn't the entity that's speaking, none of this is relevant to God because Hashem is Ein Od Milvado. There is nothing but Him, right? So there's no conceptual space within which HaKadosh Baruch Hu can articulate something outside of itself, because all there is Ein Sof. Therefore, says the Baal HaTanya, Ki Ein Davar Chutz Mimenu, because there is nothing but Hashem. There is nowhere for that communication to go, so to speak, in its removal or disconnect from the source. Therefore, Hashem's speech does not work like our speech, just like His thinking is also described as being infinitely distant than our thinking, and different from our thinking. As the pasuk says, Hashem says, my thoughts do not operate the way that your thoughts work. As distant as heaven is from earth, says Hashem, so are my ways completely transcendent from your ways. So then why do we refer to this, that Hashem created the world? Why does the Torah use the metaphor of speech? Could have used any metaphor. Could have said Hashem sowed the world, Hashem built the world, Hashem baked the world. There are millions of different productive, constructive acts that the Torah could have used as a metaphor for this, that Hashem created the world. Why does it say Hashem spoke the world into being? Says the Baal HaTanya, V'loi nikra diburi yizbarach v'shem dibur rak al derech mashal. The Torah is just giving us a mashal, k'maisha dibur atachtan shabad megadol Hashem m'mashay yitzaf amenelam m'machshavtai. The same way when a person speaks, they take that which was prior concealed in their mind, they articulate it in such a way that now everybody knows what it is that they're thinking. That's what we mean when Hashem created the world with speech. It just means HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed for the revelation within Himself, kiviyachol, of something that was prior concealed. Yitzias ha'or v'achiyas mimeni yizbarach mehahelem el hagilui. What is changing, and again, this itself is hard for us to understand because Ani Hashem lo shinisi, Hashem is a homogeneous, unchanging oneness. But there is an aspect in which there is concealed godliness, we'll call that koyach, potential, and there is revealed godliness, which is called poyal, actuality. This is what we mean when we said Hashem spoke the world into existence. Koyach became poyal. Nikris b'shem dibur. And these are the 10 utterances with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. And every other prophecy, whether it was to Moshe Rabbeinu or to any of the Nevi'im that we had throughout our history, that's what it means. Hashem wasn't talking. Hashem was allowing that which was prior b'koyach to now become iterated in this mysterious way into an expression, bepoil, into actuality. The hare, but a person needs to know this. This is very important. Diburai umachshavtoi kiviyachol miyuchedas imay betachlus hayichud. Hashem's thoughts and Hashem's words, with whatever they create, because we're sitting in it literally this minute, is fundamentally unified with it. Can't say it. With existence. Derech mashal. This is mind-blowing and very deep and trippy and awesome. The same way that when a person is thinking their thoughts in their mind, they're within the person's own physiology, right? We can say that they're contained within that person's own experience. Or a person just feels a feeling. Before they start to think about it, put words to the feeling, put different constrictive vessels to the feeling that they're feeling. Just a knee-jerk feeling. Where is that feeling? Nobody else feels the feeling. It's happening within my phenomenology, right? It's in my own experience of phenomena. It's within me. All of the different words that are going to result as my mind tries to process what my leiv is feeling, at that point, they're bekoyach, believe. They're completely bound up within the pure experience of the feeling, and they're totally unified. My thoughts are contained within my cognition, my cognitive powers. My feelings are contained within my leiv, my capacity to feel, unified with me completely. Says the Baal HaTanya. Listen to this. V'kacha mamish derech mashal. What those two aspects that we just explained are to us prior to expression, in this way, listen to this, miyuchadais diburai umachshavtai shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu betachlis hayichud b'mohus v'atzmus yizbarach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's quote-unquote thoughts and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's quote-unquote speech are as unified with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's own experience, gam achar sheyatza dibur yizbarach al ha'poel b'briyas ha'olamos, even after the world is created. Very deep. That means that you and I sitting here at this particular moment in time, at the end of the month of Shvat, 2 days before Shamas Mavarcham Adar, in this particular geographical longitude, latitude, Hendon, London, with this table, and this water in this cup, and these chairs, and this floor, and this ceiling, and everything, is right now as unified with the essence of existence as all of it would have been prior to any expression that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have expressed. By us, when we speak a word, okay, it's spoken, it's gone, it's outside of us. But by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's nothing else but Him. So the revelation of the potential for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create is just as unified with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it was when it was still in potential. Nothing changed. From the standpoint of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ever-present immanence, Ani Hashem lo shinisi. Nothing changes. Just as much as whatever spiritual energy will end up becoming the world that we currently inhabit was unified with Hashem before the creation of the world, by Hashem there's no distance. That's what it difference. That's what it means when it says Ani Hashem lo shinisi. By Hashem there is just as much Einoid Mavadi now as there was the minute before creation began. Which means we are currently within HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mind. Hashem thought us into being. Hashem spoke us into being. And that's our experience. So we, as we're about to see in a minute, experience ourselves as having already been spoken. We experience b'koyach. We experience ani achrin. The bottom of the Seder Ishtalshalos. But from Hashem's perspective, nothing happened. Something happened because the world was nisgala and time began from our perspective, but from Hashem's perspective, Einoid Movade. It's still Ein Sof. Let's not with the questions for a second. It's super. We have to try to get clarity. All there is endless godliness from His perspective. So it turns out that in the Baal HaTanya we're learning another level of nuance in Rachik and Karev. What the Berditchover Rav would have referred to as Rachik, listen to this carefully. These things are so deep. I hope you're with me. Listen to this. Try to listen carefully. It's so important. What the Berditchover Rav refers to as Rachik is our perspective on reality. Where we are here, having been spoken, the world having been revealed. From our perspective, time began. Existence, is a real thing. Time and space, right, are fundamental foundations for experience. We are here, and Hashem is there. From Hashem's perspective, Karev. Because the way that we're expressing it now by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no distance, not in time and not in space. Because both time and space are absolutely within the, entity. The infinite being, even being. Again, I grapple for English words. The infinite Havaya, Shem Havaya, that thought them, continues to think them, spoke them, continues to speak them, and will continue to think and speak them until everything reverts back to the place that they never left. And our experience of reality, slowly but surely, is able to elevate to the point where we're conscious enough to live with that realization of Hashem's perspective, even while still inhabiting our own. So if you're keeping track and following the math, it turns out that the perspective of Karev is far truer than the perspective of Rachik. Because the perspective of Rachik, while true from our perspective, and Hashem wants it to be so, and that's why I'm not negating the necessity of Rachik and Har Sinai, and we're human beings in this world, part of this particular nation who received this particular Torah in time, in space, to keep mitzvahs in this reality, but that is only from our perspective. From the ultimate essence of reality, which is the Bechina of Karev, Ein Oid Movadai, it's all harabais. But I did a terrible Aveira. There's no way for me to get back to close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Harabais says, no. Not only can you do tshuva, from the standpoint of tshuva, there will be a mysterious revelation. We were learning this from Reb Tzaddik, that you were close to Hashem all along. It was all part of the journey. Harabais. Karev. The true truth doesn't negate Rachik. Hashem wants us to live in this world. He didn't create us to be angels who live. That was the whole Sefer Nefesh HaChaim, right? It was written to make sure that you don't, by learning these things, start to think, so then there's no distinctions, right? So what's the difference between Shabbos and the 6 days of the week? If really, really everything is Elikos, what's the difference between pork, lavdil, and a kosher piece of meat and chalent? What's the difference between this woman, who's mutter, a person's wife, and some other woman? It can get increasingly destructive for a person who only lives in the world of Karev. But the Baal Shem Tov came along and said, sure, we need Rachik, but guess what else we need? We also need karev because it can also be incredibly destructive if all a person lives with is the consciousness of rachek. Memela, what do we need? Give me my favorite word.
Photosynthesis.
Both, right? Both. Synthesis. We need both. Integration. Once a person really chaps this, all of the different debates around all of these different issues are moot. They're moot. Because from that standpoint, you're both right. Like, why can't you hear each other? Yes, you need them, and they need you. Yeah, they need you, but you need them. We all need each other. The Thank You Hashem people need the Just Learn Torah people. And the Just Learn Torah people definitely, right, need the Thank You Hashem people. And everybody needs each other. Everybody needs each other. That Hashem created the world as a system of dialectic, where there's chesed that's supposed to reign in gevura, and there's gevura that's supposed to reign in chesed. Because Am Yisrael is a nation that emerges from Yaakov Avinu, which is the energy of Tiferes, and that's that beautiful line from the Berditchover that we learned earlier, that Klal Yisrael need to believe in both. Let's finish up. Ella el habruim. It's from our human perspective hamakablim chiyusam bechinas diburias barach that we experience having already been spoken out of the mouth of the divine kiviyachol bechinas yitziyas kvar al hapoel bebrias ha'olamas that we perceive ourselves to have already been created bebrias ha'olamas shemislabish be'amlach yosam like shtalshalus mi'ilu va'alo that we experience the whole seder shtalshalus from Keser to Chachma to Bina to Chesed to Gevur to First Netzach Chodesh Malchus from Atzilus to Bria to Yitzira, Tahasiyah. We experience that whole chain of emanation. The Yeridas Hamadregas B'Tzimtzumim Rabim V'Shoinim that we perceive the whole system to exist. So that we could exist as the way that we exist. And from our perspective, there is a chain of emanation. From our perspective, there is a ladder. From our perspective, you can go up and you can go down. You can get closer to Hashem, and yes, you can get further from Hashem. You can be more connected to the Torah, and you can be less connected to the Torah. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. And in reality, all of these tzimtzumim, this whole perception of distance, is because Hashem hides His face, which means the real reality, which is Einoid Malvadai. Lahastir lahalem ha'or v'achiyas hanimshach midiburi yizbarach shelo yizgala b'chinas gilei rav shelo yuchla tachtonim lekabel. And the whole purpose is so that we should experience free choice and a sense of identity and individuality. Otherwise, we would not be volitional. We would not be able to keep the Torah because I wouldn't perceive myself as a self, because all I would perceive myself as, which is the true truth, is a spark of the divine. And if I'm a spark of the divine, so then I don't have any agency. Hashem wants us to have agency, hence the Torah, ubacharta b'chayim. That's the foundation for the whole Torah, otherwise you can't keep it. So Hashem wants us to experience our reality. That's why from our perspective, when we read the psukim that Hashem spoke the world into being, from our perspective, we perceive that the way that humans speak. Hashem spoke, and now there's creator and creation. That's the way, generally, that we're raised, in an aspect of a rachik. Hashem is there, and we are here. Why? Because we perceive the dibur of Hashem to be similar metaphorically to our speech, where a person had a thought inside and then they articulated it outside. And we perceive ourselves to be outside of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That's our experience. Like a person himself experiences speech. However, we need to remember this, and this is one of the major yesodis of the Sefer HaTanya, and obviously of all of the Mekubalim and the Chasidim, but we need to remember that in the real reality, by Hashem, Ein Shum Tzimtzum Behester Behelam Master Malam Lefanav, by Hashem, there is none of this. There is none of these levels and distinctions and higher and lower and time and space. By Hashem, all there is Elokus. Even darkness, which we experience as darkness, by Hashem is not dark. Mishum she'ena tzimtzumim alavushin davar nifrod mimeni yizbarach chas v'shalom. Because again, like we established, there is nothing outside of Hashem. So even this that Hashem spoke the world into being is weiter within the Ein Sof. What then does speech become a metaphor for? a metaphor for mikoyach elapayel. That's it. To create the illusion for conscious beings to perceive themselves as having been spoken within a reality that appears to have been spoken, right? In the literal sense, so to speak, to have been articulated externally. But be'emes, says the Baal HaTanya, what do you mean externally? There's nothing external. It's weiter within Elokus. There's nowhere else to go. Because ein oid milvadai. Memela, from Hashem's perspective, all of the levushim are weiter him, right? They're weiter Hashem. Ella, to quote the Zohar Kadosh, and there's a really important source to remember, with this we'll finish, kahadein kamsa, this is likened to a locust, de levushe, mineube. The locust has an exoskeleton, but the exoskeleton is just an outgrowth of the skin that the exoskeleton is there to protect. It's lavush, it's wearing a garment, but the garment is mineube, right? The garment is part of the locust itself. This shows up halachically, by the way. For example, if a person wants to make a bracha right at night, let's say, and they can't find their kippah, so he tries to cover his head with his arm. Does it work? Doesn't. Why? Because says the Mishnah Brura, and this is what was being communicated, a levush that's part of you is not a levush.
Someone else's hand does.
Someone else's hand, or a cloth, right? Or to cover your ear like this, that's something else. But what you see, even in halacha, you see Kabbalistic principles. What halacha is telling us in this instance is that a lavush minei ube is lav shmei lavush. It's not called a covering. But it's covered. Yeah, but it's covered with itself. It's the same thing by the Boyreis Baruch. Sure, HaKadosh Baruch Hu went through a process of creation, and he clothed himself in layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. And we experience those layers as real. So we feel like we've been spoken out of the divine, and Hashem is up there, and we're down here, and there's the aspect of Rachik, which is Har Sinai, and the whole reality of time and space, and all of the Aseis and Lois Aseis, and all of life, Ubacharta B'chaim, in a Chanami, 1,000,000%. But from Hashem's perspective, all of those livushim are weiter him. And in Memela, just like in halacha, a person cannot cover themselves with themselves because it's not a covering. Be'emes, all of the coverings being themselves made out of elokus, like hadein kamsa de lavish minei ube, like this locust, right, which has this exoskeleton that's an outgrowth of itself. There's no lavush. There is no lavush. From Hashem's perspective, every single aspect of the created world is part and parcel of Shem Havaya. K'moshe kasav ki Hashem hu ha'elekim. Or k'moshe nisbar b'makam acher v'lechein kamei kula kala chashivi mamish. By Hashem, all of this is just melted into one. It's all one, it's all one, it's all one. So the Nefesh HaChaim wanted to caution us against meditating on this too deeply because we have a job to do in this world. And like I mentioned before, Karev without Rachik, devastating disaster. And this was the aside of all of the Misnagdish articulations throughout the Dairis, and these are the conversations that are being had. It's not like a new conversation. You know, should we be learning Chassidus? Should we be farbringing and drinking l'chaims and singing a lot and traveling to Kibbutz Tzadikim? Or should we be sitting in front of a Gemara? Like, this conversation has been had in many, many different levushim for many, 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 many hundreds of years. And the perspective of the detractors to Chassidus were absolutely right. Karev without Rachik is the destruction of the whole Torah. Because that's the aspect of just simply sitting and saying, I don't need to do anything. I'm already part of the infinite. Like I can, so what Torah? Like, why do I have to do anything? I'm already good. I'm already okay. This touches upon and channels the aspect of what we've been speaking about in the Rav Tzaddik Shiurim of Yediyah, right? God's foreknowledge. The realization that I don't actually have Bechira, I don't actually have free choice because Hashem knows everything anyway. V'chule, v'chule, v'chule. What the Baal Shem Tov means to say, and Mechaber, like my humble self, or speaking about the importance of learning Pnimius HaTorah and our Dar mean to say, is that of course Rachik is important, but remember that just like Karev without Rachik is destructive, Rachik without Karev is just as destructive, if not more, because like we pointed out, the truest perspective is Karev. Karev is truer than Rachik. So to have Karev without Rachik is a devastation, but at least it's true. Think of that. At least it's true. It's not our truth, but it's his truth. But to have rachik without karev is bechlal not true. It means you're munutak legamri from the shirish. And just to have the experience of din, where all my connection with Hashem is only conditional, which leads to yush, which leads to a person falling into despair, where a person moves so deeply into their own agentic experience of bechira that a person feels that if they've used their bechira falsely, there is no hope for them. Amalek. That's Amalek. Yush. There's no connection between Aliyanim and Tachtoinim. Ki yad al keis ka. Says Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the Hasidim said that davening is the most important thing. Why davening? Harabayas. It's the bechina of Karev. That's the bechina of Hashem's perspective. Einod Mavade. The Misnagdim said that learning's the most important thing. Why learning? That's the energy of Har Sinai. Says Rabbi Nachman, and I say, learning and davening and learning. I say you need to learn and you need to daven. You need to daven and you need to learn. Rabbi Nachman said, I say both. I don't understand what the argument is. Like, obviously you need both. And that's why the Rebbe teaches the whole revelation of the aspect of Ratzah v'Shayv, the teaching of Torah Vav, running and returning. That when a person is in an experience of feeling strong in their Yiddishkeit, says the Rebbe, Hashem is still rachik. There's still more to access. There's still more to attain. You're not there yet. Keep on moving. Keep on growing. Keep on evolving. Keep on rising. And at the very, very same moment, we spoke about this so deeply when we were teaching our shiur on Torah Vav, at the very same moment, when a person sinks down into the depth, and a person feels that they've wasted years, and a person feels that they're so disenfranchised and disassociated, and that as a result of their own actions, they're so distant from Hashem, they have to utilize the revelation of Karev to hold on to that, give them strength, and realize you're still part of the picture. You're part of this story. You take your animal, you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, bring a carbon, shech the animal, you'll be fine. Not only will you be fine, but this will end because it's the real reality. Because the Baal Tshuva is channeling a realer layer of reality as a result of embodying that unconditional love as someone who's only reflecting the energy of Rachik. Ashreinu matayv chalkeinu. What I just taught now, this is Das Torah Amiti. This is the emes. This is the emes. Anything that deviates too much to one side or the other, it's already something's wrong. It's a part of the MS, not the whole MS. Because MS is Aleph, Mem, Taf. The whole spectrum. And I believe that in this dar, we need to fully articulate both. Fully. Because people are missing the boat, right? If we only articulate, or if we stress too much one side, the chevra they're not picking up on it. And yet, the chevra who are saying just learn Torah, they have reason to be worried. There are people who are going so deeply into this that all of a sudden halacha stops mattering. And all of a sudden, and on the other side, right, if all we say is, learning is important, halacha is important, we're also losing a huge swath of Am Yisrael that are looking for that kirvas elikim litayv through that perception of a deeper consciousness and being able to really soak in the realization of Karev. And so I believe today it's super important for people who are trying to be mashpia to say this fully. We need both. Like Rabbi Nachman, learning and davening and learning. Learning, davening, learning. Har Sinai and Har Abayis. Har Abayis and Har Sinai. Ratzah v'shoiv. Shoiv and Ratzah. Ayeh and Malay, another articulation of this idea. We need both. Like the Berditchover tells us, the Anu b'nei Yisrael tzrichen lahamin b'shnei bechinas. Then and only then are we going to be able to channel the light of the Echad, Yachid Umiyuchad, who Achaz Diber Elikim Shtayim Zushamati. When Hashem says one thing, we hear two because we are in the realm of duality, but we can trace by bringing those two things together as one to be able to allow for the revelation of the Achaz Diber Elikim Shibizaycha Be'ezras Hashem to toe this very fine line, to keep this nuance of the balance between both, and have a Yiddishkeit that's body and soul, soul and body, Karev and Rachik, Rachik and Karev, Har Sinai, Har Abayis, Ratzah Shoiv, and be Yidden who are b'shalom. Shalom, right? L'rachik v'l'karev amar Hashem. Shalom, shalom. Be'ezras Hashem.